Well, I'd like to open the Marin Municipal Water District Board meeting for June 1st, 2026. June 2nd, 2026. May I please have a roll call?
Um, Vice President Larry Russell,
Here.
Director Matt Sampson,
Here.
Director Ranjiv Kush,
Here.
Director Diana Mayer,
Here.
and President Jed Smith.
Here. May I please have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Terrific. Any public comments on the agenda? On the adoption of the agenda?
There are none.
Great. A roll call, please.
Vice Chair Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Yes.
Director Kush,
Aye.
Director Mayer,
Yes.
and President Smith.
Aye. And any public comments on non-agenda matters?
Yes. Rex Rydell.
Hello, my name is Rex Riedel. I'm a high school student at Redwood High School, and I'm also a prospective Eagle Scout with BSA Troop 59 in Lawrenceburg, California. I recently completed a successful Eagle project on Rock Springs Trail near the Mountain Amphitheater on Mount Tam, which is under the jurisdiction of the MMWD. And I was helped by Alexandra Panara, who is the trails coordinator for the MMWD. We replaced 2 bridges on the trail. It was a lot of work, but we successfully completed it 2 weeks ago. During the process, Eagle projects have to be approved by both the project beneficiary, that being the MMWD in this case, and the local council for the Boy Scouts. And the Boy Scout Council of Marin had some trouble approving the project because there was a heavy hand of the MMWD in the project. So just for future Eagle projects for people who follow in my footsteps, I was the first one to do one of these projects on the mountain for a long time, I was told, which I was surprised to hear. And I think that should change. So something that needs to change to make that more friendly to Eagle Scouts is letting Eagle Scouts have more freedom and jurisdiction over the project. But overall, it was a great project, and I was helped a lot by an MMWD representative. So thank you.
There are no further speakers.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. And feel free to reach out directly and give us more comments if you'd like. Appreciate that. Great. Any directors and general managers announcements? We'll go from the left.
Nothing.
Nope.
Thanks.
Okay, just general before the committee. Great. All good. I just want to say happy election day. This is an important day in our democracy and our country, and I'm hopeful that everything will go as smoothly as possible, regardless of who wins. Let's hold our heads up high. Moving on to general manager.
Very brief. This really falls kind of another day, but wanted the board to hear about it because these things often find their way into the paper. We began the Fairfax Pipe Project underway. Yesterday, I think, was our first day digging and, had a pretty good day. Today, we found the contractor dug up appears to be a human remain. Again, this is not uncommon when you're digging, all kinds of things. But anyway, the project is stopped. The coroner came out. The tribe's going to be out tomorrow. I think, we'll keep moving the project forward, certainly, but just a quick heads up on that.
Thank you. Committee reports. Rajiv, I think we have finance.
Mm-hmm. So we had the Finance and Administration Committee meet on Thursday, May 28th, and we heard from Arthur Gallagher Risk Management Services. They provided an overview of the insurance premiums for FY 2027 and actually had some cost savings with what you would call her, the person who's heading up the effort. Had the respective companies take a good look at all the work the district had done to mitigate wildfire risks. So we got some cost savings because of that. We also got an overview of the district's monthly financial update, noting that there was slightly higher revenue and but we still remain about 5% below budget. I think we're going to hear more on that today. Let's see, we got briefed on the district's quarterly investment report for the period ending March 31st, 2026. And all of that's available on the website if you go to that date on the in the meeting section, May 28th.
I'll add a couple of comments. I think it would be important if the board members who weren't present to check out the meeting and anyone interested in the public. May and June will be important, but the last couple of months we generated $2.4 million in incremental revenue due to the dry month. So that was actually super impactful for our year-end results. And another bonus was that we had $3 million in investment income over our budget, which I think is a direct result in part or in large part to our decision about a year ago to go with CAMP as our alternative. And so a huge shout out to Brett and in particular Greg for bringing that to our team. I know we talked about possibly having awards or something internally for individuals who bring either expense reductions or other opportunities for financial to the agency. This would be one. It sounds like Greg deserves a lot. That was really super well done. And also double down on the comments about Gallagher. I was super pleased with that meeting. The last year's meeting was so high level. We were talking about general risk around the country and fires in Colorado and why insurance companies have to raise rates. This was so tailored to Marin Water and each of our buildings, each of our issues, our land issues, our dams, the risks around construction, et cetera, and even more data could be available for us. So I am thrilled both with the cost savings, but also with the tailored approach and our look at risk management in this new way. So thank you for that. I don't think there are any others, right? All good? That was just 1 week. All right, terrific. Now we'll move on to our consent items. And we have a few, the minutes from the previous meeting, the Marin County elections to perform election services. We have our contract with Forrester and Kroger, capital improvement program for the Miracle Mile, which we've discussed, the professional tree care company contract, and that's it. Is there any comments on the consent items?
No. President Smith, I'd just like to make a comment on item number C, and that's the additional money for Forrester and Kroger for that additional work. And a lot of this money is being spent on exactly what you just talked about in terms of what lowered our risk for our insurance coverage, which ends up resulting in decreased premiums, so cost savings. So we're going to see a return on this investment as we move forward. Not only is it financially important, but operational continuity of operations, and then just being a good neighbor to our surrounding community to reduce our risk like this. But it's very meaningful when we're actually seeing a return on investment from mitigations that matter in the insurance side. That means we're on the right track and we're doing the right thing. So very excited to approve this item tonight.
Yeah, great. I agreed. And not only is it reducing our premiums, but I think they can teach us how we can do better. And so that feedback loop is terrific. Any public comments on the consent items?
There are none.
Roll call, please.
Vice President Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Yes.
Director Kush,
Aye.
Director Mayer,
Yes.
President Smith.
Aye. All right, moving on to our regular items. 5:25. We're moving. All right, Matt, we're doing all right. What's that? Yeah. Okay. Item 7, please. 7A, our amended professional service agreement with Woodward and Kern. Paul Cellier. Quip, please.
I always quick. Just
Was it quick? Paul?
Quip.
Quip.
quip. Oh, quip. Oh, okay. We can kick off with a quip. So on this day, June is really important historically, isn't it? And when you think around just back in history, June is kind of an ominous date.
Yeah.
For the water district, this is on my mind for some reason. I'm sure it's on yours, is sort of how did we get here? And it was June 20th of 2021 when the board declared the emergency with respect to the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge pipeline. So that's where we were just 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And we were projecting running out of water. So that's been our world since then, is trying to figure out a way out of that. And in a weak segue to our action item before the board tonight, Woodward have kind of been by our side throughout that journey. And really an instrumental part, certainly, of that Richmond-San Rafael emergency intertie project. So tonight, it is the action item for amendment number 3 with Woodard and Curran. They're supporting our water supply roadmap. So we'll just touch on a little bit of that history with Woodard, and then we'll get into the scope of amendment number 3, and that's going to lead us to talk a little bit about in-system improvements, which we've heard a little bit about as part of our roadmap, and then next steps and recommendations. So over the years, since the Richmond San Rafael Bridge, really, and even before that, we've been working with Woodard and Curran. They've helped us really in ways that this slide doesn't necessarily do justice to. But there are a few items on here that have been extremely helpful. And, going down to the third bullet, if any of you have ever tried to decipher an old spreadsheet that's been constructed years and years ago, you understand the difficulty in going back through a spreadsheet and trying to recreate what the creator was doing. And that's just the task that was in front of Woodard and Curran as they took the Jacobs model, which was put together in great haste as we were going through the strategic water supply assessment and trying to make sense of that and bring that model to bear on all the subsequent projects that we pulled out so that we could estimate the water resources associated with those. The last 2 bullets, again, detailed modeling and cost of water analysis for roadmap projects. That work continues as we refine the capital cost for the projects. And we saw just recently an example of modeling work that helped us understand what we call the North Marin Line 1 project, where we're trying to think about pumping water backwards through our system out into the reservoir. And you'll see in a couple of slides why modeling is such a key aspect of that work. So in amendment number 3, we have continued program support. So broadly over all of the roadmap, including ARC. And as we see here, a lot of the work in this amendment 3 is dedicated to ARC. But of course, there are new project ideas and concepts that come up along the way. And it's good to have a resource like Woodard to be able to work through some of those in a quick manner. And then finally, refinement of the bottleneck portfolios. So understanding bottlenecks, there's one key concept, I guess, that's really important as we think about the bottlenecks. Essentially, a bottleneck in itself is just a restriction in the distribution system that prevents water being delivered to a particular area of that distribution system. Yet, in our case, if you think of the distribution system in terms of demand, in the summer months when demand is high, a fairly small area of the distribution system will consume a fair amount of water. Yet to use that same amount of water in the wintertime when demand is low, you have to spread it out over a really wide area in the distribution system. So it's a little bit counterintuitive. So that means during the wintertime, we've got to work harder to move that water to a much bigger geographic area. And that's where these bottlenecks come in. Our challenge really is not identifying bottlenecks, it's figuring out what the sort of optimum combination of these projects is to give us the best bang for our buck in terms of water over what we can take now and cost. So that's really what's in front of us in terms of the bottlenecks.
So Paul, just for increased clarity, what we're talking about is moving water north to south and really expanding our use in the winter of Sonoma water.
Definitely expanding our use of Sonoma water in the winter to serve a wider area of the distribution system. So that's where resolving the bottlenecks would allow us to move that water to a wider area in the distribution system. And we'll get into a little bit about what Ben just mentioned in terms of how the system was designed to move water in a minute, because you'll see it a little easier on the visuals. This was the slide I was talking about. We don't need to worry about the spaghetti here. The point is this is what models are really good at, is you can define all of these squiggly lines in terms of capacities and volumes and flow rates and plug them into a model. And then it allows you to interrogate that system, and it'll point you to where the most effective improvements might be. That's the emphasis and why bottlenecks has been such a heavy modeling effort for us. Another way to look at this is in a flow chart. So this sort of chart is, it's identifying projects. So little green boxes, like this one that says 1A, for example. And looking at the key, that indicates it's a pump station improvement. So we need to increase the capacity of that pump station. If it's a box with a red number in it and letter next to it, that's a pipeline improvement. And what you'll notice on this chart, it's not immediately, but I'll point it out, is that everything here that's being proposed to be done is helping us move water from the right-hand side of the page over to the left-hand side of the page. The system was designed to move water in the other direction, from left to right. So our bottlenecks improvements need to help us move water from the right-hand side of the page to the left. You can correlate that with north and south and east and west. It's not perfect but generally the system moves from San Geronimo and Bontempi sort of south and a little bit east to Ross Valley, and then Ignacio kind of feeds the Peacock Gap area and that sort of thing. So we're trying to take that Sonoma water that comes through Ignacio and move that into the Ross Valley and as far south as we can get it. So not to get into all of the details right now, but just the system's designed to move water in one direction, and these bottlenecks are going to allow us to reverse that a little bit. When we look at the bottlenecks, and we've done a fair amount of work, this chart is on the left side is capital cost. This is an estimate of capital cost. And then on the bottom x-axis, if you will, there's a capacity. So how much over what we can take today will the suite of projects that are identified on this chart, how much will they increase our flow from Sonoma? So if you were to pick a dot down here, the one that has 2.0 and 24 million next to it, that's portfolio 2.0. And I don't have the key of portfolios. It's very long. And this is just sort of illustrative of what bottlenecks are. It's not intended to be the sort of definitive presentation on bottlenecks. So this gives you an idea that it would give you about a little bit more than 5 MGD improvement over the baseline today at a cost that we estimate of around $24 million.
So Paul, when we talk about costs on this project, it's somewhat unique. Tell me if I'm correct, that all the projects are upgrades to existing facilities. So really what we'll be doing ultimately with this is prioritizing our CIP, right? And adding this as a highly scored criteria that, it just may move forward some pump stations that need rehab anyway. And as we're rehabbing that pump station, which is sort of already built into the CIP, we may increase the capacity, for example. So I just want that kind of understood. It's not like an additional, this would fit into and be prioritized as part of our capital improvement plan.
Yeah. So the work we've done, there's a level of detail to it, and there's additional refinement to this that's going to change some of these numbers tonight. So again, not the definitive presentation on bottlenecks, but just to give you an idea of how we're going to go about selecting what the optimum is. Some of the work that we still need to do in the next steps are, for example, we will have identified Lucas Valley Pump Station. That's a key pump station. We'd love to be able to upsize that. It would really help us. You can do that analysis on paper, but you don't understand is that when you go visit the site, there's no room to do that. And the height of the tank that serves that pump station is limited, so you don't have enough suction head to change the capacity of the pump station. So there's lots of physical limitations, and we need to get into those to understand if a particular project really belongs and deserves to be part of our portfolio from a constructability perspective. We want to screen these against a common set of criteria. It's been a theme throughout all of our water supply planning is to look at a set of criteria so that we can analyze these projects. Of course, we'll be coming back to the board with a final bottlenecks update and the recommended portfolio. So we'll be able to talk in much greater detail about what those specific projects are that Ben was talking about. But yeah, they're essentially investing in existing infrastructure, just improving that capacity. We're not adding any new infrastructure in that way. So the staff recommendation is seeking the board's approval for amendment number 3 with Woodard and Curran, an amount not to exceed $477,900, and to authorize the general manager to execute the agreement.
Great. Comments?
Paul, thank you for that update and thank you for, I guess, a little bit of a precursor to what you're working on. And the graphics definitely help, even the spaghetti one, which is a little hard to read. But I think this is an important and responsible step forward to look at this component of our total water supply portfolio. Where currently is Russian River water distributed again in terms of geographically as defined by our boundaries?
Yeah, it will move a little bit depending on, as I say, demand, but largely speaking, it's going to serve kind of that eastern corridor. If you think of Peacock Gap in the summertime, most of the water will be down there. In the wintertime, some of that water does make its way into Forbes Reservoir, and so it can get down into Ross Valley a little bit.
Gotcha. So mostly right now it's the northern part of our district.
You can think of it that way, yeah.
Okay.
It'll be a moving boundary, as they say, a little bit.
Gotcha. Well, it's good to see that we could potentially move it even more and get the most out of it, especially if we're going to be rehabbing our infrastructure anyways. Is there any opportunity to also look at our tertiary distribution system as part of this in terms of bottlenecks? Is there any way we could identify some of that? Or do we even have an issue with that right now? Or is it more of just a pipe location currently?
The recycled water system, it's not really bottlenecked per se. We need additional pipeline lengths to capture more properties, if you like.
Sure. No, understood. That makes complete sense. The only other thing I'd like to just make sure we're doing is that I think we're doing a very responsible approach in terms of having Woodard and Curran really evaluate all these other alternatives, especially the one you showed last meeting with the different distribution. I'm assuming we are cataloging these. So the next few years, if this get looked at again, we can already go back and say, we've looked at that and this is why.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. That was it.
Are there any comments? Nope. Any comments on when we approved our water supply roadmap? We had a sorry, I'm jumping ahead of you guys, but I'm just going in order. Right. We had some predictions on the spend and the impact of that spend on which bottlenecks could be beneficial to us. So I think there was a couple of $1 million and it was going to generate some number of acre feet. Is that right? Do you have an initial list and now we're going to go refine that and look at it again?
Yes.
Okay.
So yes.
And what was that we thought that this bottleneck project could be impactful? How much did we think?
Acre feet wise? Yeah, we're thinking around 1,500, maybe 2,000 acre feet.
For several $1 million, I think.
Yeah, and the range is 20 to 50 million, somewhere in that
in that zone. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so you're going to report back on that when?
I don't have a final date for the presentation, but it will be probably later this fall, fall.
Okay.
So September.
Okay.
Yeah.
This year.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Nothing.
Great. Ranjit, any comments?
Thanks, Paul, for another, helpful presentation. I was also curious about how the different bottleneck improvement opportunities aligned with the roadmap, and it sounds like we're still looking at that number of about 1,500 to 2,000 acre feet through in system improvements.
Yeah,
basically. Now, I'm often asked, why don't we just in winter months supply the entire network with Russian River water, make the changes or improvements that allow us to supply the entire system rather than, with ARC move extra winter water to reservoirs.
Right.
Now, I believe you've told us that the limitations for doing something like that is being able to turn off our existing treatment plants, San Geronimo and Bontempi, and they're just not designed to be turned off and essentially replaced by imported water.
Yes.
Do I have that correct?
You're correct. And there's also, when we did that a little bit in the drought
Mm-hmm.
To try to maximize use. And what we found was water quality challenges. As you try to spread water out throughout the system, it ages. And so you're moving Ignacio water, trying to move that water all the way down to Sausalito, for example. It's challenging for us.
So there are water quality, treatment plant operations, other limitations in addition to bottlenecks that
Yeah.
sets
So-
some boundaries.
The, right, chlorine doesn't last forever in water.
Mhm.
So that's really what's going on. The chlorine gets consumed. And if you think about it, it's not just a transit time through a pipe. It's going into a reservoir and sitting for a bit. And then it's moving into another reservoir, into another tank, that kind
I
of
see.
thing. And the journey does take quite some time.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Great.
Maybe we need
Thanks.
a resolution.
Information all right now. You're looking for approval,
This is action item
okay.
tonight for
Uh,
approval of
motion, please.
amendment.
Public comment?
the public comments on this.
Yes, Martha Davis and then Eric. Good evening, Martha Davis with the Nicasio Landowners Association. Let me take my first comment on this. I'm going to reverse the order of what I was going to be able to say. I do agree that the bottleneck analysis is incredibly important. And it really goes to this whole concept of in-system improvements that directly deliver winter water from the Russian River to Marin customers through the distribution system. This is once described by one of your staff as front loading. It was when she was talking about the Castagna pump improvements. And it's a smart thing to do. Front loading is beneficial because it is the least costly option for using this expensive water supply, particularly when compared with the ARC project. But what's really critical is in addition to the direct benefit, for every acre foot of Russian River water that is used, that's extra to what you're using right now, an equal acre foot remains in storage in your reservoirs. Think about that. We're designing the ARC project to get Russian River water into your reservoirs. This is a reverse operation system that has a double benefit in terms of drought scenarios of making sure that more water is being carried over in your reservoirs into future years, which will keep you more resilient, at least during longer droughts. So the work plan is silent on how the evaluation of the in-system improvements will inform the alternatives evaluated in the ARC EIR. And I think it's really important to think about how we do the alignment. The other part of this authorization relates to work that's being done on ARC, which is great. But I want to just make sure that we're really clear that 2 years ago, the first question that should have been clearly answered is whether the adequate space in Nicasio Reservoir during the winter months to hold water proposed to be pumped from the Russian River during the winter atmospheric events. The ARC portion of the proposed work plan jumps over this question into an optimization strategy for ARC operations. Months ago, we were told that there would be information available on the modeling records that clearly demonstrated that the proposed ARC project can deliver the promised drought year benefits. And this is the first question that really should be answered by the consultants. And it's hard to understand how the kind of parallel paths that are being taken in the projects that are in this work plan fit together and how they support the EIR process. So we should see from the consultant the analysis of what really can be produced by ARC for drought resilience by putting water into Nicasio. We should also see what is happening with these local bottleneck studies and how they augment the resilience, both from the standpoint of direct and the indirect benefits of the water in the reservoir. I have one more. Thank you very much.
Great. Any other public comments?
Yes, Eric, please.
Yes, this is Eric Grove. I want to commend the effort to try and update all of this modeling system. It's clear that the previous models were deficient and then they had aspirations for increased storage that have not materialized. So this whole business about trying to find out where the water is going and who's using it and how much is going to be used in a situation like the most recent drought would make us all a lot more confident about what's going on. So I certainly commend you in trying to get that done. And I would like to see, painfully detailed demonstrations of how this is all supposed to work when it really gets into trouble. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I have no further speakers.
Terrific. Motion for approval for this.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Vice President Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Yes.
Director Kush,
Aye.
Director Mayer.
Aye.
President Smith.
Aye.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to our budget update and the beginning of our budgeting process with Brett Uppendahl.
All right, good evening, directors. My name is Brett Uppendahl, Finance Director here. And as you mentioned, this is a budget update. It is both our mid-cycle update for our current 2-year budget, as well as President Smith mentioned, kind of the beginning of the budget cycle going forward. In the budget world, we're kind of always straddling 2 to 3 different fiscal years and different cycles. And so I'll try not to be too confusing in my comments, but the primary purpose of today's item is just to kind of affirm our budget for next year as we are in the middle of our current 2-year cycle, and to let the board know that this is the beginning of the conversation as we start to work on our financial planning and everything else as it goes into rate setting for next summer and next fall. So I did just want to, a lot of these are real summary level slides just to kind of give the board and the public a little bit of context on the numbers that we're talking about, the recent changes we've gone through, and what we're looking at over the next couple of years. So this is the overview of the presentation today. We'll talk about the process, a little bit of our CIP change in the last couple of years, and how rate revenues play into that going forward. And you may have seen these slides a little bit. They don't change because we have not changed our budget in the sense of the high level approvals. Our current budget this year, $186.5 million. That includes both our operating and capital funds. That was a pretty significant increase from the year before, 14% increase. Within that, the large portion of that increase was the capital fund. As you kind of scroll down to that third or fourth bullet, we had a 33 or 36% increase last year in our capital fund, a more kind of inflation-based increase to our operating fund there of 4%. And then as well, as we'll talk about with our capital fund, the increases there over the past couple of years have been intentional. They've been policy-based. They've been to support not only our water supply enhancement projects, some of which we just talked about in the prior item, as well as some of our deferred maintenance capital improvement projects, things that had not been addressed for years. We've talked about the Gibson tanks here a few times, and some of those other kind of key single points of failure like the Tokoloma pump station. So a lot of the funding that we do have within our capital budget is meant to address some of those large-scale deferred maintenance projects that we were not able to handle in previous years. As I mentioned, in addition to water supply, in addition to our IT modernization efforts that you'll hear more about. So this is we have a 2-year process, and each year we do that. We come back to the board mid-cycle. This would be this June. So we're not asking for a full approval, but if we did have any major changes, this would be the time we'd bring it to you. I can tell you, kind of skip to the punchline, is we don't have any major changes, so we're not going to ask the board for any changes to the approved budget for the second year. The overall process map here for those that are kind of more visually inclined. Right now we're at the spring, summer of the 2-year cycle. So we finished our year-end accounting from last year. We finished our financial analysis and some of those kind of initial looks mid-cycle. Now we're looking at demand analysis going into the summer. We're looking at any big changes in our revenue trends or expense drivers. And we just recently approved the contract to begin a rate study with outside consultants to take an even deeper dive once this fiscal year ends. We'll get into the fall and winter, obviously the next couple months. That's when we'll kind of update our kind of what I call our baseline budget, which means if you rolled everything forward exactly as it is now, how does that look? So you'll start to see some financial plans in terms of what does that make us look like over the next 2 to 4 years? Is there any major changes to revenues or expenses? We'll go through a process internally and with the board about district-wide prioritization. If there's any changes that need to happen between the budget, whether between operating and capital or between capital projects, or amongst different divisions and kind of the initiatives we're doing with the staffing we have. We'll finalize our revenue and demand projections in the fall, so that'll be a key step going forward because as we know, and we'll show later here, so much of our revenue is dependent on our customer demand. And then once we finalize those demand projections and we've talked through the different pieces of the rate model, we'll finalize that rate study likely in the winter of this coming year. And then once we have that in the spring and summer there in the far right box, we'll begin our community outreach. We'll go through our final Prop 218 procedures with our rate setting process. Assuming the board approves the water rates, those will then drive the budget workshop right behind that. So it is a pretty accelerated spring and summer. That'll be a year from now, and just the way that the calendar works. So we'll have, like I said, the rate process, then the budget workshop right behind it. You'll be hearing me and my staff and our team talk about these in many different settings, whether it's board meetings here, whether it's finance committee meetings, whether it's planning meetings. So you'll hear it in a lot of different, from a lot of different people and a lot of different levels of detail. But we're trying to make sure we're being consistent and transparent and making sure we're keeping the public and the board with us along the way. So numbers wise, this is just kind of a high level summary of the budget. I've said most of these numbers already, so I won't drag you all the way through them. But I think bottom line change in fiscal 25-26 there on the top row. As I mentioned, we had a 14% overall increase. The lion's share of that was driven by our capital funds. Next year, you'll see much more normalization. So as we get into fiscal year 26-27, starting in July 1st, our operating fund will increase by about 5%. Again, that's basically COLA and inflation based. Our capital funds will go down. That's not an intentional reduction. Really what that is a drop off of some one-time grants. And so underneath all that, our rate-driven capital is still increasing. We're just being offset by the reduction of some one-time grants. And then for balancing purposes, we did have to drop our contribution to reserves down from $5 million in the current year to $3.5 million next year. And so we think that we'll have to keep that level going forward. But as we'll talk about also later, our reserves are filling up into a pretty healthy level now, so we don't need to be overly concerned with adding more there. I think the biggest portion of this reserve contribution would be our water supply project reserve that we would like to keep going to continue to accumulate funds there. By category, again, graphically here, same numbers you just saw. This will be fiscal 27, so starting to look into next year. Really is almost an even split here between our personnel services and our capital projects, about a little over 60 million each. And then our day-to-day operations and maintenance is about 50 million. So we have three big drivers, as you might expect for an organization like ours: our staff, our capital improvements, and then our day-to-day operations and maintenance. Debt service does not change. We're on a fixed schedule there, so it's going to maintain its level right about 9.5 million. And as I just mentioned, we have our reserve contributions right now at 3.5 million, the bottom right there. That is comprised of a $2.5 million contribution to the water supply project reserve and then a $1 million contribution to our unrestricted reserve. In terms of our operating budget, I think it's always good to remind the public of what that is actually funding. And so we do have 254 FTE here in the district. Those are spread out as shown here on the chart, with operations in the middle being by far the largest division that we have. And then admin and engineering being the next two largest at about 45, 46 people. And then watershed and water resources, about 25, 27 in each of those divisions. So this goes back to my beginning comments about where the budget has been. So this is a 10-year look at where we've been for capital and operating. Operating there in the blue and capital in the gray. You can see the gray trend lines have gone, fluctuated depending on our funding and depending on the prioritization that we have. But really, about 5 years ago, we were right around that $20-25 million range. With this recent round of investments and in the rate structure that we've had, we've increased that from, again, the $25 million range all the way to the $65 million range. That is nearly a tripling of our budget over the last 7 years. And I know the board has talked about that with Alex and the engineering team about staffing and resources to complete that budget. You'll notice that's averages out over 10 years to a 12% increase. So it really has been a reinvestment back into our system. Operating increases have been much more kind of normalized in the sense of 4 to 5% annually over the past 10 years, and we expect that to continue. In terms of percent of the budget, this is our capital fund percent of the budget. So if you look at just, for every dollar that we bring in terms of revenue, where are we investing it back into the capital fund? So again, 5 to 8 years ago, we were investing about 20% of our rate revenue back into the capital needs. We've increased that overall total to in the mid 30s now, 36 this year and 34 next year. So that has been the major change. And again, that's been able to provide funding for some of these really large projects and for a lot of the water supply roadmap projects that we were just discussed in the last item. Breaking it down one level farther on our capital program, this does show kind of by category within our capital budget. Obviously, each of these categories have 5 to 10, in some cases even more projects that they're funding. But you can see the significant increase in pipelines, nearly doubling and almost tripling over the years. Storage tanks, that would include Gibson tanks and some other major ones. And then our treatment plants are going to get the next kind of increase over the next couple of years as we invest more and more into our treatment plant maintenance programs. Watershed there at the bottom as well. You can see we're increasing from the 3 million range to the 6 million range. And again, for not to repeat myself too many times, but water supply, looking at fiscal year 22 and 23 was not a category. We didn't have a called out category specifically for water supply, and that has been a big intentional and policy-based increase to ramp that up to about $9.5 million a year over the last couple of years. So timeline going forward, here we are right now, March, April, May. I guess as President Smith noted, we just crossed over to June, so we've revised our budget projections. I think as was noted in the last FAC, those budget projections have improved for the current year. We've had a couple good months, and so we've been able to kind of decrease our gap or our expected deficit into what looks now to be pretty close to a break-even year, depending on next month. We're starting the rate study. We have a kickoff scheduled for 2 weeks from now. In June, July, and August, we'll get our final year-end numbers. We'll finalize our demand projections, and we'll make any adjustments necessary to reserve balances, and we'll bring those to the board as we conclude the fiscal year there. And then we do conduct our audit in September. We'll finalize our rate study and publish our Prop 218 notices, and there are some elections happening in November that will also be a part of the calendar going forward. As we flip the timeline here to 2027, so starting in January, we will have a new general manager and potential board changes. We'll also be pushing pretty hard on community outreach to make sure that the community is aware of what may be changing in the rate structure. That goes along with our Prop 218 notices. We'll have some public hearings in the spring next year, budget hearings and public hearings on the rate structure. And then we'll be expecting to have the next 2-year budget adopted by the board in June. So we have to have that adopted before July 1st, before the fiscal year begins. We also expect the new rate structure to take effect July 1st as well. So the reason I'm talking about rates so much here is, as you can see, this is our revenue budget only. And our revenue budget right now, you can see the top line, our rate revenue, about $175 million next year in 26-27. And that pales in comparison to our other revenues of just $12 million. So we are largely funded over 95% by our rate revenue, which is why we focus on it so much and why we talk about it each month at the FAC. Looking into that category here, again, 93% currently coming from our rate revenues. We get a small portion for fire flow there. The portion in red, $4.5 million, that also goes to our capital program. Grants largely go to our capital program as well, including our watershed. And then permits and fees are a lot of our non-rate revenue we make in terms of supporting our discount programs and kind of providing the extra little non-rate revenue that gives the district more flexibility. And the lion's share of what's in the other category is just our interest earnings there. So not a lot to really look at there other than, and I think I mentioned this a few times, we expect interest earnings to go down in the next couple of years. So they've been a pleasant surprise, kind of on a one-time and a short-term basis, but we're not going to count on that going forward. Within the actual rate revenue here, water sales being 70% of that, those are the most volatile. Those are variable and they do have the tiers in them. We also have the green portion there, watershed management fee, that's variable based on usage, but it's just one tier, so less volatile. And then the green, I mean, not the green, but the orange and the gray areas there are fixed fees. So those are much more stable. I think the board is aware we have shifted more towards a reliance on our variable rates. And so that has increased some volatility, though I do think we've done a pretty good job of monitoring that and understanding it. Although we will study that again pretty closely with our rate consultants this summer to find out if that's the right ratio in terms of variable rates versus fixed rates, both for the business side here and also impact on customers. The other piece of this that I always keep in the back of my mind is not just the year-to-year revenue and budgets, and a lot of the things that I bring to the board are kind of that 1-year look each time. There are many things that carry forward multiple years and many things that happen outside of the budget process in the sense of unanticipated emergencies and things you have to plan for that you wouldn't put into every budget because it's not going to happen every year, but you need to have that safety net. And so the board has done a lot over the last 3 or 4 years on restructuring these reserves. We currently have 8 different reserve buckets that the board has identified. Those do help us kind of take our cash balance and put it into buckets that we can manage, we can work to, and we can kind of show not only to the outside auditors, but to our to those who would be giving us bond proceeds in future years and to the public that we do have money aside for emergencies. So we're not going to have to stop everything. If we do have an emergency, we don't have to cut our capital budget. We don't have to immediately go to any kind of draconian measures to balance the budget. We have some time built into this based on building up these reserves again. They are up to a pretty healthy level now in most categories. You can kind of scan down that target amount there in the current balance. Most of our current balances, this is again as of June 30th last year, we'll refresh this, but our current balances are largely very close to our targets, specifically there in the capital and in the operating reserves. We haven't increased our rate stabilization yet because we haven't had to, so we've kept that right about the 10% mark. Water supply project kind of increases each year as we have met the target for 2.5 million. Our pension stabilization, we've had some really good pension reports, so we have not had to increase that either. We've let that roll over at 4.7 million. And then it'll be my next item for the board today, but we have talked about adding a new facility fund within this reserve portfolio that would give us a target that we can start moving towards in the future. We have not deposited there yet. I'll be talking about that in the next item, but that would be something that we would like to see going forward, is accumulating some funds in the future for any kind of major projects that we do on the district's facilities. A final number here that I just wanted to share with the board is inflation. This was a big story 3, 4, 5 years ago with not only the coming of COVID and the federal monies that were there, but everything else that was happening in the last 4 or 5 years. So you can see those big spikes there in 2020 and in 2021. The two different lines here, the blue line is CPI for the Bay Area, and CPI is just kind of a general inflation measure. The orange line is the construction cost index, so that drives a lot of our engineering projects and some of our operating projects. So that really is measuring the cost of any kind of construction here in the Bay Area more specifically. So not only have they come down from their highs, they were in 2022. I mean, the construction cost index was crazy. It was 12, 14, 16% there in 2022. Those have come down even to negative levels, so kind of really reverting back to the mean over this last winter. And the CPI here has maintained a nice little, 3 to 4% over the last year, which is a great range to be in terms of predictability and in terms of overall cost offset. I think we've mentioned a few times, CPI is not the best measure for us. We don't, spend equally across all the level of goods that a consumer might, but it still is a good indicator of kind of what we're facing, generally speaking, here in the Bay Area. We are a little bit more impacted by not only Sonoma water purchases, but PG&E. So this might get skewed a little bit one side or the other, and we can take a look at that as we get into rate setting. But I was very surprised to see what a nice drop or leveling there has been in the construction cost index. So that's really our big ticket items when we go to pipelines and storage tanks and things like that that really take the industrial products. So overall, this is a good place to be at for now. Who knows what will be going forward, but it is a good place to be for right now. So this is my last couple slides here on budget planning. So for the next coming year, fiscal year 26, 27, obviously there's a couple major dependencies we'll have, and we'll never be able to avoid these. But water use and consumption, as it was this year, will be largely dependent on weather patterns. And so I think we even though we have finished this year and improved our revenue projections kind of based on the middle of the year, our biggest months still will be in the summer. And so we'll see how the summer goes in terms of June, July, August, September. Those will largely impact whether or not we make our numbers for next year or not. Interest rates, as I mentioned, have been sustainably high and sustainably positive for the district. We don't know how long those will last and how long they can keep them that high. I just know that when they go down a lot faster than when they come up. So we're prepared for that. And then unanticipated repairs or capital projects, we're overseeing a 120-year-old system. Things will happen over time. So we know that, we see it each and every year. We can't predict everything, but we do have some, as I mentioned, reserves for these, but we also need to kind of be flexible in moving things around to not only take care of unanticipated repairs, but sometimes there's alignment on capital projects when cities or the county is working on projects. We need to kind of swoop in there for cost savings over the long term. So those will be the uncertainties next year in terms of, what we're expecting to see in revenues and expenses. The list is longer in the next 2-year budget as the planning horizon goes out. You get a longer list of uncertainties. Water use projections, again, similar. We're going to be studying that quite a bit this summer. Inflation, as I just showed, has come down, but we don't know how that's going to be going forward. Purchased water costs from Sonoma have kind of hovered around this 7 to 8% the last few years, and that's what we're planning on. But those get decided each and every year independently out of our control, so we can just make our best guess there. Personnel costs, we have a contract for the next 2 years, so we know what the base salary is going to be in terms of our budget, so that does make things easier. Healthcare is more out of our control. That's largely driven by, obviously, CalPERS and the healthcare providers. We saw double-digit increases the last couple of years on Kaiser Healthcare, so that's kind of this underpinning driving some of our longer-term costs for healthcare up. Pensions are largely driven by stock market performance, and that's been strong the last couple of years. So we're expecting that to continue to be strong, especially in the sense that both healthcare for our OPEB, which is our retiree healthcare, and our pension systems, those have long-term smoothing mechanisms built into the funding now. So no 1 year changes these too much anymore. It's over a 5-year period, and we have 3 or 4 pretty good years in the bank right now. So in terms of when the ugly parts of those long-term obligations come up, we don't anticipate that in the next 2 years. We will react to it if we have to, but we're thinking the next 2 years are going to be pretty smooth. And I'm sure I just ruined ruined it by saying that, but in terms of the way the formulas work, I think we're looking in a good spot there. I would like to mention to the board too that within healthcare, the board may recall we adopted a contract 2 years ago with our employees where we created a second tier of retiree health for new employees, and we got a report back saying that's starting to factor into our costs, and that the normal cost, which is what they kind of charge new employees on the kind of the year by year, has gone down by over 50% for the new employees. So we're starting to see those savings come in. Those savings will really start to show themselves 10 or 20 years out, but we're starting to see that right into the actual reports now, that the new costs are about half of what the legacy costs would have been. So that's obviously good news from a financial perspective. Regulatory changes. We work closely with not only Sean and his team, but Molly and her team on if there's any impacts to our rate setting or long-term planning in terms of our capital projects, in terms of our watershed planning, in terms of anything coming down from the state. And then finally, interest rates. As I mentioned, those not only make a difference in our earnings as I've been focusing on, but as the longer term plans would have it here, we're planning to do a bond issuance soon, and so borrowing costs then become the flip side of that. So there's probably a perfect ending to where we can kind of keep our interest earnings high while we have them, and then start to see lower rates right when we want to go out for bond funding. That'd be great. We can't predict that necessarily now, so that becomes a long term kind of uncertainty, at least going forward. But we'll have to just wait and see how those go. And obviously, there's always chances to change in terms of our refinancing with borrowing costs, but we'd like to kind of hit that one on the number as we go out there for the first run and get the lowest possible rates we can, so we're not having to do transactional costs in between. That actually completes my presentation here. So just to kind of wrap this up, I think the budget's in a good place now. We've improved our projections for the current year. We don't see any need to change the next year's budget right now. And we'll be bringing back much more information on this in terms of our baseline and kind of our rate planning over the summer and into the early fall for next year. But I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you very much. Ranjiv, do you want to start us off?
Thanks, Jed. Thank you, Brett, for another good update. Just on our capital budget now, you've noted that we're about 30%, 35% of our revenue is now being dedicated to capital funds.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a sense of where we lie in comparison to other similar agencies, water agencies, sanitation agencies? Are we on the high end or somewhere in the middle?
I think capital is always a challenge for any agencies. I think it's, deferred maintenance is not very fun to talk about, and it's, digging things up to fix things that weren't a problem is not easy to do for anybody. I have not done a recent analysis on other agencies around here. I know at the county, when we were there, we were always trying to increase our capital budget because we had so much infrastructure across this county that needed to be improved and needed to have kind of long-term sustainable funding, because it's always the first thing to get cut. I don't think they spent the same percentage of their budget because they have so many more people there. So it's a tough one to kind of gauge percent of budget on. I would also say, not to kind of muddy the waters, but a lot of other agencies use debt funding. And so it's not so much their budget each year as it is their debt service behind that they're paying for that. So it gets to be a little bit complicated to kind of really get into what allocation of the resources is going into their capital planning. So I can bring that back to you in terms of as we get into the budget cycle where our best guess is to some of the major agencies around here. But I do think that for us ourselves, it was a needed increase because we had gone so many years of kind of just bare minimum funding, and we have so many big projects that just kind of based on not only just anecdotal evidence, but hearing Alex's presentations and some of the Woodward stuff, there's some big ticket projects that have to go through that we either, had to debt service fund, which we're not, or cash fund. And cash funding is always the best place to be in my mind in this because it gives you flexibility. And so I think it was a very good move to increase the budget to that level. But it is something that the balance has to be reevaluated every couple of years. And I look forward to taking a look at it this summer.
Right. Well, another factor that's somewhat interesting is many agencies, let's say over the last 10 years, have had a lot of growth and development, and the connection fees have funded a big chunk of their capital.
Mhm.
And here we just don't have the growth, even in the Bay Area, right? That's sort of exploded in the East Bay and somewhat in other North Bay. It hasn't happened here, so the numbers would be a bit different as well.
Right. On debt service, Brett, when we do issue bonds, will the payments for the debt, do you expect that to have a substantial impact on our future budget? Do you have any sense of that? Or if budget trends remain, are we able to service the amount of debt that we're anticipating for new projects?
So as it is now, what the plan is, as you may recall, in the line I showed you on the capital funding there, we had zero funding for water supply projects, and that's increased itself to $9 million.
Right.
So the idea would be once we've picked our project and we've decided this is where we're going, we take debt service for it, we would take that cash funding away from our water supply portfolio and use that specifically for our debt service. So that's 9 million right there that just becomes a swap essentially from cash funding some of these studies and planning and original efforts into the long-term debt service. So that's about 85% of what we would need for some of the projects that we're talking about now. So coming up with the other $1 million or $2 million on top of that wouldn't be a major burden on the budget. We would be able to find that either within the capital program or by reprioritizing some of our operating funds. So I don't anticipate having to raise rates necessarily for those. I do think we'd have to shift around, like I said, from cash funding some of these early projects into just a dedicated long-term strategy. So I don't think it'll have a major impact on the budget in terms of any changes other than internal moving things around.
That's good to know, and it's an important nuance, I think, that we're going to have to transmit when we talk about the financing for a big project like ARC. I think the last is just a comment. It's great to see the the inflation of the construction cost index come down, but costs still remain really high based on what you showed happening in the COVID years.
Yeah, and that's
I mean,
one of those.
we're still, that'll be impacting us now going forward.
No, I think you're right. And that's kind of one of the tricky things about those numbers is you see numbers in the teens and, high 10% range, and then you see it come down to zero. That doesn't mean it's coming down. That just means it's stopping going up. That's the point you're making, that there were significant increases there, double digit, 3 to 4 times what you expect in a year. And those haven't gone away. They've just kind of now flattened off going forward. So you're right. We haven't seen relief on there. We've just kind of seen them, the inflation is no longer increasing at that same level.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Brett.
Great comments.
What have you kind of factored into this whole equation AMI and how that's going to impact, what's available in terms of funding, and have you looked at that in terms of thinking about rates for next year?
So AMI is currently in the budget in terms of in our capital budget. We expected to have that in there. So we have funding for the AMI installations. And I know the board recently approved the pricing contract and kind of the initial plan there with our AMI with Badger. And so in terms of the expenditures to put AMI into the ground, I don't see a major change there, other than I know by slowing that down a little bit compared to the initial assumption, that is helping us to kind of be able to not have to cut other projects, because we are seeing likely a little bit of a slowdown in rate revenues as compared to some of the other inflationary pressures. So it's helping us to balance the budget without having to either raise rates or cut other projects by slowing AMI down. The flip side of that would be in terms of gaining revenue. Generally speaking, AMI will be more accurate and should save us in some of our water losses and and kind of have early leak detection. And so those are hard things to put into the budget or into the rate cycle. But I think, as we get that first wave of AMI installs in over those 2 or 3 years, it'll probably be the next rate setting cycle that we'll start to see that in terms of improved accuracy, in terms of reduced losses on water, and potentially in terms of, less purchases on water. So the difficult thing here, I guess, is what I'm saying is it's hard to put anything into the rates planning cycle or the budget cycle that hasn't quite happened yet. And so we'll be kind of beginning those both at the same time. And so I don't like to kind of guess and get into it. I'd rather see a year or two of data before we put it into something like rates. And so I don't think it'll impact next year's rate planning as much as it would probably 4 years out when we get into that.
And just to be clear, really what I'm getting at is one of the reasons we're in the small amount of deficit we're in is because people are saving water. And the goal of AMI is they're going to save even more. So I just want us to be cognizant of balancing that with, we want that, but that also means less income. So I guess that's really what I'm trying to get at is is there any analysis on how that might look for us?
Probably not to the level that you're asking for now in terms of how that offset will work. I'm hoping that it's kind of a wash, essentially. I'm hoping that the increased accuracy on because old meters, they don't show the low flow, especially as well as the newer meters. So I think we're going to get a couple percent increase on better accuracy, offset by that couple percent reduction in use. But I think that's to the net benefit of the district, because not only are we saving more of our water, we're purchasing less water. We'll find leaks earlier, because those are things we have to refund eventually, and or causes a big big mess for our customers if they have a big leak bill. So
Mhm.
I think all in all, it's for the good. Financially speaking, I'm hoping it's more of a wash.
Okay, well, fingers crossed.
Great. Yeah. Larry, any questions, comments?
From my experience with AMI, it's essentially all the savings are related to the increased accuracy or measurement by the meter.
Yeah.
It isn't so much increased accuracy, it's just measuring better because it's not as worn out.
Yeah.
Um, Great presentation. And again, I think kudos for the accuracy, which you predicted this budget going forward. You set a hard or a high bar for next year. So, but can you just remind us again why we chose to reduce the contribution reserves by 1.5 million?
But it was twofold. One was that, we set our rates 4 years ago, and we were kind of looking at, where the trends were. And I think, just penciling it out and knowing what we thought was our, kind of to reset kind of our budget in the middle of the rate cycle. The rates were already set. We had to reset our budget. We knew we were making a couple percent less in terms of overall water sales than had been originally projected. So we had to cut it somewhere. At the same time, we had a pretty good year the year before in terms of expenditure savings. So we were able to build up most of our reserves pretty high, especially the unrestricted reserve. So we didn't need it as much, first of all. And then secondly, it was the easiest thing to not have to fund, because rather than cutting positions and or cutting out the capital projects, we can just, kind of see how things roll. So that's why reserve funding is kind of a nice aspect to have within your budget, because if you don't have the funds for it, it's kind of a wash anyway. You didn't have to hold money back just to put money back in your pocket. So generally speaking, it was because of the savings the year before, and it just made it to be the most convenient way without impacting other services or other capital projects.
Gotcha. And will that number need to be reevaluated based on the next item we have tonight?
Not based on the next item we have tonight, but based on how we end the year fully once we get the audit in August and September. That'll drive that number.
Great.
Again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was it.
Real quick one. I was pleased to see the pension stabilization fund was up to 4.7 million. Do you see that stopping at the 6.3? That was the number you listed there as the 60% or something like that.
The calculated goal. Well, as I mentioned, especially with pensions, they have a smoothing mechanism built into it. So I think when we were setting those targets of the 10% of our UAL and the 20% of our UAL, I think we were thinking that it would always buy us 2 to 3 years to kind of make other adjustments. So that's meant for like one of those, when we had the COVID year going back to 2012, when you have a minus 20 in the market, something like that. That first year CalPERS comes out to you is going to be a big shock, and then that'll start to kind of smooth itself out. So I think we were thinking get us through that first year, and then we can adjust after that. So we can consider going higher than that, but with our unrestricted reserve, which the board can always move towards those areas, and or with other expenditure savings, I think we wanted to take a look at that before we just held money aside that, maybe could have waited a year or two to fund. So I think it will stop there, but I'm happy to kind of look into it.
That makes sense to me. I just was curious.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. You made a small comment that the pension reserves are doing so well because the stock market's doing well, and we can expect that to continue. And I don't know that we should expect it. But it's just a small,
You're probably right.
small
Yes,
comment.
you're probably right.
No, I appreciate the conversation. I'm looking forward to our CIP review and looking at our capital projects, because obviously things have changed, things have shifted. I want to second the comment up to look at our debt capacity and what we can borrow, especially for ARC. Lots of people are coming up with any way possible to shoot a hole in ARC, and one of them is it's too expensive, we can't afford it. So why don't we answer that for folks? And I think we were pretty clear about our debt capacity and what we can take on, and why don't we knock that one off the list of naysay?
Okay.
All right. Any public comments?
There are none.
Okay. Terrific. Thank you for the update. Looking forward to the next step on that, and we'll move on to the next item, which is an approval item for our budget policy, reserve policy.
And this is me again. I don't have a presentation for you today. This is a little bit of an administrative kind of follow-up. So on October 23rd, 2025, we brought this item to the Finance and Administration Committee. The item here is a recommendation to establish another kind of sub-fund or fund within our reserve policy that's for facility reserves. And so the concept here is that, we do have a capital improvement program that does fund, most of our major capital, most of that's outward facing and or minor repairs. Knowing that we have some aging facilities, both the building we're in here and the courtyard that were both built in the 60s. We have over 60,000 square feet that houses almost all of our employees. We know there'll be significant needs for expenditures in the future. And so we just wanted to start building up towards that now. So the idea is if we have savings in the operating fund, that's unrestricted savings, and if we're in a good enough spot, we think we should start putting a couple $1 million a year towards the facility reserve fund that can either be used for, an unanticipated break fix or to begin a project for a much bigger kind of improvement and or purchase or acquisition. So I know there's been much talk about, the future of the admin facilities here. And so this is not meant to solve that. This is just meant to kind of start the financial planning towards that when we have the funds available. It would probably be the most discretionary of the board's current reserve funds. But we are recommending the target be set at percentage of our operating budget or percentage of our personnel budget, just to give it some targets that are kind of more related to staffing here. But those can be debated, but I think there's just a good way to start and kind of keep it within a current range. And so right now, as it's written or as it's proposed, if I can find it here. We're asking for the board to approve the addition of a fund within the reserves to have a minimum balance of $1.8 million and a target balance of $12.5 million to be used only when the board approves it and for major facility renovations or purchases or repairs.
Great. Architect Sampson.
I think it's a good idea. And the question I have is that $12 million target, is that enough to actually move the needle on a project? I guess, what would be the constraints right now in today's dollars and what kind of project we could do with 12 million?
I don't think it would be the full project costs of anything major that we did, and I'm probably not the expert in what the kind of different ranges are. I would defer to Alex, who I know has been studying that pretty specifically, and or General Manager Horenstein if they have an idea. But I think the 12 million here was just meant to get us a good start towards that, and hopefully kind of reduce any impact on the CIP or other future borrowing costs if we needed to.
Yeah.
Just reminding the board, we have two studies that are underway. One is the Sky Oaks facilities, and we're looking at potential upgrades to those facilities from just a work site and also potential enhancements. And we'll be bringing that to the board. And we have another study that's looking at this building and across the street in a similar fashion. For this building, for example, we're looking at three different approaches. One is kind of the big one, put a second story on this. The other one is, can we bump it out? And the third is, if we, for financial reasons, need to keep to the current footprint, what can we do to rearrange things, more efficient utilization of space? So for example, if that's where we land for this building, potentially, we could just fund that work and fund some other work at Sky Oaks. So I think we need to let it play out and see where we are financially, get feedback from the board and what these two studies reveal.
Sounds good. And just for clarification, this does authorize the expenditure to purchase land if we wanted to as well.
This section does not. This just puts the financing.
I'm sorry, the policy would allow for this money to be used for the purchase of land?
It can be used for the purchase, for the acquisition, for renovation, or for financing
Great.
costs.
That was it. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Me too. This is great. This is important. And I'm glad we're going to finally take a good crack at helping Sky Oaks be as good as it can be. Sooner the better. Any public comments?
But Jed, before we go there, just one clarification. Brett, I missed the answer that you gave to Matt when he asked how would we be determining the amount that goes into a new reserve? Considering that we're already decreasing our contributions to reserves, could you just repeat, sort of what is the mechanism that tells us how much money is going to go into reserves and then this new fund?
So There's not like a kind of clear formula for it. We have a target, just like the other reserves. We have a kind of a minimum target balance and then a full kind of maximum target balance. So when we get the final audit each year and we find out how much is kind of left over or what could be in our cash amounts, that's when I work with General Manager Horenstein and the Finance Manager Shelley Riley. We take a look and see how they're spread, and if we're going to make any changes, then we bring those to the board. So I think what would happen is we would finish our audit this year. We would come to you in September or so and say, here's what we have out there. This is how we ended last year, and these are the changes we're recommending to make. And so we would ask for your approval to kind of make those first deposits. Mechanically speaking, they're all in the same bank account. It's just as you kind of divide that out into, the different buckets so that we can manage them and kind of, have targets. And so it really is kind of just a board approval for how much we put into each account, and I'll bring that to the board in September, most likely.
Okay, understood. Thanks.
Great. Public comments? No public.
Yes, we
Yes, we
do.
do.
Larry Minikis, please.
Yes, Brett, thank you so much for these presentations. And I guess where I'm going is more of a question, which you may not answer simply because this is a comment time. However, I noticed that you're taking the watershed CIP budget from 3 million to 6 million through 2028, essentially doubling it. My question is this anticipating an upgrade to SkyO? And with that, thank you so much.
Thank you. There are no further comments.
Great. Motion for approval, please.
So moved.
Second.
Great. Roll call.
Vice President Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Yes.
Director Kush,
Aye.
Director Mayer,
Yes.
President Smith.
Aye.
Thank you.
Terrific. On next board meetings? Mary, you wanna go?
Yes. Our next board meeting is June 16th at 5 p.m. Then also that same week, we're going to have our special watershed committee meeting. Special board of directors meeting, parentheses, watershed committee, Thursday, June 18th at 5 p.m. at the City of San Rafael's City Council chambers. So just reminding everyone about that. We're not having it in the morning at 9:30 here. Further, the North Bay Watershed Association meeting was canceled this month, and that's all I have.
Great. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.